Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. In this video we're talking about Capricorn season 2021, and pretty interesting. It seems like just yesterday we were talking about Capricorn season 2020 and what a big event that was a year ago when we had the great conjunction, right? That Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius, launching another 20-year cycle. And actually a 400-year cycle that began just a year ago, astrologically speaking. So it was a big deal, and it's interesting to look back now at what this year that was, 2021, and how that is really the beginning of a very new era that we're entering into. And this era does have an Aquarian feel to it. And we'll talk about Aquarius as we look at Jupiter, what's going to be moving through Aquarius, leaving the sign and going into Pisces later this month. We'll look at the year that was Jupiter in Aquarius and what that meant. We still have Saturn in Aquarius for another year and a half or so. So Aquarian themes will still abound. But of course, we're talking about Capricorn season. And when we talk about Capricorn season every year, of course, we're talking about the winter solstice, one of the 4 cardinal points of the solar year. So very significant date in our annual solar calendar as the Earth makes its annual journey around the sun. So the winter solstice, which is the real reason behind a lot of our holiday traditions that we celebrate this time of year. These are instantiations of much more ancient rituals that were centered around the winter solstice because, you know, our ancient ancestors really understood the value of these very critical points in the solar year. When we have the shortest day and longest night, we think about that. What does that mean? Our bodies understand it, right? The rhythms of our body are tuned to these seasonal rhythms. And we get a sense of what that means. Our body is understanding, oh, the days have gotten shorter and shorter, right? We're into that shortest day of the year. And then we're going to move back towards an equilibrium as we move through winter and into spring and the spring equinox when we get to Aries season. So we're going to talk about Capricorn season. The sun will move into the sign of Capricorn on the 21st, which will be the winter solstice. But actually, we're going to start this video a few days before that because something rather significant will be taking place on December 19th. And as we'll jump over to the charts here and take a look at the sky now. Of course, I have it set up for December 19th, 2021. And we have it here at about, if I go back to, say, 2 o'clock in the morning here in Pacific Standard Time, I want to draw your attention to what's going on in the sign of Capricorn. We have Pluto and Venus coming into a pretty close conjunction. They were exactly conjunct a few days ago. We've been in this, the power of this conjunction, which I want to start off this video talking about because something significant is happening with Venus. If we go 1 hour later here, we see that Venus will be stationing retrograde. We are going into Venus retrograde period, which happens once every 18 or 19 months. But every year and a half, we get into Venus retrograde. And if we just jump over to the solar system here, what's going on with that, right? So this is a phenomenon. It's very interesting with Mercury and Venus. Their retrogrades happen a lot differently than the other retrogrades of the outer planets, the planets that orbit beyond Earth. We look back in at Venus and Mercury as we make our journey around the sun. So this is a phenomenon that happens as we pass through the same sort of part of the sky as Venus. It's going to appear to drift backwards. But when we look out from our position on Earth, what we see is that Venus is in alignment with Pluto. And this is pretty significant. And this is what I want to talk about as we begin this video, this configuration. Wrong way. So here we are on the chart, and of course, what's going on here with Venus retrograde? Well, what happens whenever we get a planet retrograde, obviously it tends to move back on itself. It tends to be in review of all of those functions that that planet normally represents. So if we take a look at a graphic here, I always like to bring up these word clouds. I think you guys know I'm a big fan of that. Let me get myself off of there so you can see that. So 3 archetypes that we're dealing with here. Venus and Pluto, the 2 planetary functions that are conjoining during this period, right? So what happens during conjunction? Well, those 2 energies, those 2 functions tend to merge. They tend to commingle. They enhance each other. And when you're dealing with the kind of energy of Pluto and Venus, well, Pluto is much more powerful, right? It's very powerful. I mean, it's all about power, right? It has this magnetic draw to it. So as Venus stations retrograde rather, and starts its retrograde motion as it's conjoined Pluto, this is really going to set a particular tone for this particular Venus retrograde period, which lasts about 6 weeks. So we're going to be in this energy all the way through to the end of January of 2022, and it will linger on even as once Venus moves direct and moves back through its shadow through this period in this part of the zodiac it's going to be retrograding over. It really is much more like a, more like a 10-week process. So when we talk about Venus retrograde, we want to think about all the functions that we normally associate with Venus going into reverse, folding back upon themselves. So this process with Venus, which normally is our sense of how we relate, right? What do we value? Our love and affection and emotion, right? It's just the yummy part of our personality that just wants to love and be loved and wants to be affectionate, and is what we're attracted to. What is it that just moves us? Our passions, our hearts, that we want, sensuality and self-worth. So a lot of this energy will be in review. So we'll be reviewing our relationships for sure, as we do during this period of Venus retrograde in this cycle. Moving back over what is it about our relationships that's working, what isn't working. So sometimes these can be challenging periods for relationships. Oftentimes we go through breakups just happen during Venus retrograde. So if a relationship isn't strong, it tends to come under much more strain during retrograde Venus. Throw Pluto into the picture, and boy, do we get a double whammy on that potential. So we really want to be super strong and secure going into this period, knowing our relationships are about to come under a transformational crucible, if you will, right? Because Pluto wants to transform everything it touches. So with Pluto and Venus together, right, we're going to get this transformational energy. We're going to get Pluto trying to evolve, and Pluto can be very intense, right? It's the most intense, one of the most intense archetypes in the entire pantheon of the zodiac, because it comes from this very deep, underground, unconscious place. We think about the id. We think about this instinctual sexual drive, this often volcanic and eruptive force. It's very unconscious. So when we get that Pluto energy commingling with a Venus that's stationing retrograde, it's going to sit there on this point in the sky for the next week or so. So we're really going to feel this over the entire holiday season, for better or for worse. So a lot of this retrograding, a lot of relationships. Of course, we're all going to be experiencing this during holidays when we're spending much more time with our family. Which brings into the fact that we are experiencing this planetary energy within the qualities of Capricorn. Remember, the zodiac sign always gives us a quality. It qualifies how these planets are functioning, right? So this is all taking place within that cardinal Earth, practical, very conservative energy of Capricorn. So it's like a restructuring of relationships. And again, with retrograde Venus, we want to focus on the very most important and primary relationship, which is relationship to self, Are we secure in our own relationship to ourselves? Are we listening to ourselves? Do we value ourselves? Because we can't relate, right? We don't bring our whole self to relationship unless we are in right relationship with self. I always like to remind us of that fact. And so there's a lot of depth to this configuration. Plus this Capricorn, this is bringing up the energy that has really been present for us since the beginning of 2020. Remember when we had Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn and Mars all coming through Capricorn and being conjunct. That was sort of the trigger of the whole coronavirus pandemic and the whole world that has been turned upside down since then. So some of that is probably going to be a little bit on replay. What is our feeling about it? How do we emotionally relate to this new world we find ourselves in? How are we navigating it? How are we structuring ourselves and our lives and our relationships in response to this global transformation that is afoot? And that's really still going on, right? With Pluto and Capricorn, we've got 2 more years before it moves out of the sign. And these last 2 years will certainly be very critical in terms of its effect, right? What Pluto and Capricorn is doing is it's challenging and trying to transform the very structures of our entire society, which Capricorn represents. Represents hierarchy, represents authority, represents law and order, represents the patriarchy, the father. This brings in the family dynamic as well. And as we'll see, one of the things that will be happening a few days later, we're going to get this, the moon will be coming into opposition over in Cancer. So we'll have a Cancer moon, which is, you know, the sign of the moon, right? Very comfortable in Cancer. So this dichotomy between moon, Cancer, and then Pluto, Venus, Capricorn. That Cancer-Capricorn axis always tends to accentuate family dynamics, right? It's the maternal and the paternal, a lot of family struggles. So we'll be having this configuration throughout sort of this holiday season that we're entering to. So I just want to put that out there as a, I don't know, just a way of coming into it, you know, as we may be having very difficult and challenging conversations around the dinner table this time of year with relatives and family members who we may not always see eye to eye with. We might not agree with them politically or otherwise. And so really want to be challenging ourselves to be able to listen with love, listen without prejudice, keep an open mind and an open heart, right? Venus. Because there's some deep stuff is going to get stirred up during this configuration. You can count on it. But how we respond to that is really what we actually do with this energy, right? It's not like this is fated that we're just going to have this knockdown, drag out, blowout with our dad or our cousin or Uncle Bob. But that energy is present. That potential is present. That's why I always like to use these word clouds, right? Because it really shows us the archetypal nature of what we're dealing with. We can always find a light and a shadow side to any of these archetypes. And of course, if you can find, you know, the more practical, if we can get in touch with our values, if we can really get solid in our relationships, really secure and structured and productive, right? That we can really and find ways to channel that Plutonian energy to continue to evolve them, right? To grow in emotional security. Then we get the benefit of this configuration. But always ever present is the shadow side of all 3 of these archetypes, right? If you can get into some sort of shamelessness and you get overly attached to your sexuality, you can become very hedonistic and self-indulgent and get spendthrifty, right? Well, then you're not working with your structure. You're getting insecure, right? You're getting callous and miserly, right? You could get all of the downsides of this and then throw in Pluto's shadow, which casts a very long shadow, right? You get this sort of, you can get the demonic, you can get the that unconscious violence that's just eruptive, it's extreme, it's destructive, criminal, right? Of course, we always want to look for these things showing up in the collective as well as in our own individual consciousness. And it's going to be a very unconscious energy going on. So it's a lot to, that sort of sets the tone. Before we even get into Capricorn season, this is a really big, strong configuration that we just want to bring up so we all can set the table, literally, for what's going on as we enter Capricorn season. So that's intense. And so we'll just kind of keep moving along here and work our way through. And let's get to that day on December, well, I have it as 21st here just because if I use the clock a little differently, it actually, boom, it's going to be about 10:30 in the morning here, Pacific Standard Time. We get the sun moving into 0 degrees of Capricorn. Of course, we see him right away. It gets this yod configuration with the moon in Cancer and the North Node in Gemini. So kind of like, hey, welcome to Capricorn. And it shines a light on what is traditionally a very difficult or, it can be a challenging configuration, the yod. But, Capricorn season. So with what's going on, we already have talked about this conjunction between Venus and Pluto. We also, Mercury has been moving through Capricorn ahead of the sun for the last week or so, almost 2 weeks now. So a lot of Capricorn energy going around. As I said, we're seeing the moon come around here. Here's that opposition I talked about on the winter solstice. So this is what I'm talking about with that family dynamic. With the moon in Cancer, we're going to be very emotional. We're going to be very sensitive to our environments, right? And then you've got that Capricorn, whether it's the authority, the structure of our family of origin, sometimes the pecking order, we get together with siblings and there's those rivalries and we're vying for attention with our parents and whatnot, or just difficulties. But also opportunities for real emotional sharing, caring, healing to take place with this configuration as well. Keep in mind, always the potential for the most beneficent parts of these archetypal configurations. Which is why we use astrology. It's why we want to arm ourselves with the understanding and the perspective and the awareness of what's present so that we can be the most attuned and aligned channels for that energy. It's all about energy. That's all we're talking about here. So it's a good kickoff to the Capricorn season this year. And, as every year is different. Every season is different. This is what's giving us this quality of time, which is a phrase I always love when we talk about astrology, because that's what it's really describing, is the quality of time versus the quantity of space. And a lot of it's very simplistic, but you can think of like science and rationality as like it's trying to quantify space. And it does a really good job of that. That's why we need these more metaphysical modalities, because what they're trying to do is give us the quality of the time we're moving through. So this time will have this quality with all of these archetypes sort of crowding the house, right? All under that Capricorn umbrella. Structure, practicality, discipline, all coming into focus. Earth, cardinal earth, very practical, very grounded. We're calling to be grounded in this time. And we'll talk about this a little later on when we talk about New Year's intentions, being grounded. All right, let me check my notes here. Let's move through. I'm going to jump now to December the 23rd. We'll see here, let's just draw this out so we can get a look at it. Our old friends Saturn and Uranus. And this is a configuration we've been talking about all year. This is one of the major themes of 2021. This ongoing square between the two titans, Saturn and Uranus, who are rather different archetypes. They couldn't be more different in a lot of ways. So we'll see here, we've got 11 degrees Aquarius, 11 degrees Taurus, the third and final exact square of this configuration. right? And we've got Uranus still moving retrograde, which is the only, now with Venus moving retrograde, but it has been the only retrograde planet for a while. The last sort of the outer planets to turn direct. So very interesting energy here. And I expect, for those of us who've been tracking this, right, I've been calling this the revolution in what we value, right? Why do I say that? Well, Uranus in Taurus. Taurus is all about values, right? Ruled by Venus. We just saw how it's about value, right? And this is the earthy, practical part of what do we value? What is really important to us? It usually comes down to money or possessions. We can think of it materially, but it's also about some of us might value relationships. Some of us might value wisdom or knowledge. Some of us might value the environment and having a beautiful home and a place to be comfortable in. But we're getting a revolution in what we value in this square with Saturn in Aquarius. And as we started, we talked about what's going on with Aquarius. Aquarius is this energy that wants to also revolutionize, because there's this sort of mutual receptivity. It's not classically receptive, but Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. So with Saturn, which is the traditional ruler of Aquarius, so there's a lot of this weird jockeying for power over what is Aquarius, right? What is the future that we're trying to instantiate here, right? Aquarius is all about, it's an air sign, it's a fixed air sign, it's a very high-minded, idealistic sign, it's very socially oriented, right? It's all about the brotherhood and sisterhood of man and woman, like humanity. It's all about grassroots, bottom-up, peer-to-peer types of energies versus Capricorn's hierarchical top-down, which is why this whole dichotomy and move between Capricorn into Aquarius, it's a meta-theme of the meta-crisis, I think. If you take this astrological perspective and lens on it, I see this very much as what's playing out in our culture right now. And we're all feeling it individually as well as collectively. And this is a big collective signature, right? And we can see, we've talked about it, I've done videos on it. You can review those, but this whole conflict between sort of the authority coming from the top and control of society, right? This whole Saturn and Aquarius, if we think about what's going on with the pandemic and governments and restrictions, it's a symbol of what we would call hypervigilance. Saturn wants to restrict, right? So it's having a hard time with all the newness, the new society that's trying to birth itself in this new era, and it's saying, not so sure, I want to control it. I want to dictate how it unfolds. And that's a very much what's, when we look at our structure of our society, our governments, the big industries who are really trying to control the information, control the future. This is getting conflicted with Uranus over here in Taurus, which is really expressing a much more earthy, practical, embodied sort of sensibility, right? And so there's a conflict between this. You've got air on the one side, earth on the other. These elements are in conflict, but need to be integrated. Squares are all about an integration. They're forcing the issue, right? So issues are getting forced in the world. This is played out, I've talked about it a lot, in our monetary system, politically. The whole cryptocurrency world is very affected by this. The crypto is the symbol of this Uranus and Taurus. And so goes crypto, so goes this configuration. So wouldn't be surprised to see some weird stuff happening in that world in terms of restrictions, legislation, that sort of thing. So just want to put that on your radar. What's next? After that, we should look at, let's move forward to December 29th. So skipping over Christmas, not that there's not anything going on. There always is, but I'm trying to highlight some of the bigger things that we'll be looking at this month. And so why am I moving to the 29th? Well, that's when we get Jupiter moving back into Pisces. And this was something we got a preview of earlier this year, because Jupiter went into Pisces in late May and moved through those very first few degrees all the way through, like, I think end of June, and then went retrograde itself and moved back into Aquarius. And I, of course, did some videos on this earlier this year, talked about dipping its toes into Pisces, the waters of Pisces. And this is going to be a significant shift in the culture, I think. This is an annual cycle. Jupiter takes about a year to go through each sign. So we'll talk more about what that Jupiter in Aquarius has been over the past year. I think we saw that it was moving sort of in lockstep with the rollout of the vaccines, right? We had big pharma and big government working together to roll out a global system of very cutting-edge medical technology. That just screams Jupiter in Aquarius. So now that we get a sense of what that was like, as we look ahead now to the next year, as Jupiter shifts signs, right? It's going to move from that Aquarius, air, fixed, scientific, right? Future-oriented, cutting-edge mentality. Now it's moving into Pisces. Mutable, water, spiritual, right? Compassion, universal love, right? This whole different sensibility that we're about to shift into, and we're gonna feel this move, and you're gonna see it play out in the culture at large. So something to just look out for as we move into 2022. This will be a big theme for the entire year of 2022. And if I go to this slide here, I just want to show you. Let me get that off. So what are we going to get with Jupiter in Pisces? Again, right, when we talk about Jupiter, the great benefic, right, it's that expansive, very gregarious, truth-seeking, optimistic, hopeful energy. It's the great beneficent, right? It's the most positive of the functions, and it's really, as a planetary function, it's about where are we growing, where are we expanding, always looking to the higher, the new horizon, if you will, expansive energy. So we're going to expand and grow into Pisces, which is the great oceanic oneness, right? It's a very sensitive and creative and sort of has this like idealistic quality, which is why Jupiter is considered to be in exaltation in the sign of Pisces. It was one of the traditional rulers of Pisces before it was co-ruled by Neptune with the discovery of Neptune. So Jupiter's very comfortable and very at home at Pisces, right? That kind of, there's an expansiveness to both of these archetypes, where Jupiter, as a function of creative and positive expansion, gets to sort of immerse itself in the infinite waters of Pisces. So think about that shift that we've talked about. If Jupiter in Aquarius was all about trust the science and the vaccines and government, it's like this future world that we're moving into. Well, now this shift takes place in all of us. We're going to feel this, okay, it's almost like we have to now get more spiritually and soulfully embodied in what it is we're moving into. And I think we're going to see a very palpable shift in how we're responding to the pandemic and the reality of the fact that, this virus may be with us for years, if not decades, or it just might be a new way of life. It just is. It's part of the water that we swim in. And I think one of the messages I think is going to come home for all of us is we're all in this together. No one is left out. There's no islands in this stream. This global pandemic has really brought that fact home, right? No one is immune to this. We are part of a human family. We are part of an ecology. We are part of a planetary consciousness. And I think if there's a silver lining, if we can say that, to what's happened, that may be it. Maybe that global planetary awareness finally hits home for all of us. I think we really do have to bring that into our hearts and our souls, like really get that fact that this is reality, and we're being called to move into a much more truly global mindset than we have in the past. We've had a sort of commercially global mindset, if you will. And I think now we're being called to have a much more emotionally global mindset. And perhaps this Jupiter in Pisces period will instantiate some sort of shift in the global consciousness. Now, there's no guarantee of that, for sure. And always, we can talk shadow, right? If we look at what could be the downside of this kind of configuration, well, you can just get like huge delusions, right? We can just become just overwhelmed by confusion. There's always that potential with Pisces to just, it can be overwhelming, right? You can literally drown in this energy. It can be very escapist. It's related to creativity and fantasy, but deception is also a characteristic of Pisces. So self-deception or mass deception, mass delusion is another quality of Pisces. So like I said, Jupiter just expands everything it touches. So if we move towards that really delusional side of Pisces with Jupiter, we could be in for this massive delusion. But at the other side, we could be like sort of passionately and collectively and gently and hopefully and kindly moving towards a new idealistic vision of the future and of the planet and of the globe. So I expect, this is just a window into what's happening. That's going to be a 1-year transit, so we can look for this to be a major theme for 2022 going forward. And I think we'll really know what's going on with this Jupiter in Pisces when it comes into conjunction with Neptune in Pisces, which is going to happen, I think, in about sometime in April of 2022, because Jupiter has recently gone direct. It's moving quite quickly, and it tends to just move really fast through the new sign, and then it hits its retrograde motion, and it'll slow down and back up. And it's going to go back over, I believe it's going to hit this Pisces Neptune point 3 times over the course of 2022. So that's going to be a really interesting sort of meta theme that we'll be looking at as we move into 2022. Enough said on that. What else do we have? Let's move forward the very next day. We're going to get this the other thing we should talk about is as Jupiter enters Pisces, it comes into square with the nodal axis, which is another big theme we've talked about quite a bit over the course of this year, because Saturn was in relationship to the nodal axis all year, and it still is in that sort of, actually it's moved out now. But so this square with the nodes, who themselves are going to be ending their time. This has been another one of those 18-month cycles where the nodal axis has been moving through Gemini and Sagittarius, respectively. And sort of this is the last chance to really get in touch with that configuration of that axis, right? We've been getting this opportunity to really look into the past, and in Sagittarius, philosophical, spiritual traditions, religious traditions, right? What are the good things that we can pull from our collective past, from our familial past, from our personal past? What are the valuable nuggets, those gold nuggets that can be unearthed and retrieved, polished off, that may be helpful as we move into the future, Gemini, right? We've talked about this quite a bit. So we're going to get the moon. If I go through a few hours later, I think we'll get the moon coming into conjunction, moon and Sag, with that south node. The last time we'll have the moon conjunct south node in Sag. By the time of the next cycle, the nodes will have shifted. They're moving back into Scorpio and Taurus, respectively, which is going to be another, we'll talk about that probably in the next video. But that's another theme, these big cyclical transitions that we're going through. It's good to be aware of. So last chance to do your Sag Gemini thing. And we've talked about that quite a bit, so you're probably aware of what's going on with that energy. If we move to New Year's Eve here, 31st, Sun trine Uranus. And you see a lot of Uranian energy here, right? It's making a lot of aspects. You get the trine to the Sun, it's in conjunct Mars, it's square to Saturn, it's retrograde. So I think about that Uranian energy and some of the things that might be constellated by Uranus, right? And it's very rebellious. I think about one of my favorite ways of thinking of Uranus is the deconditioning agent, right? Saturn is the conditioner. Saturn makes the rules and the regulations, right? We get conditioned by our social imprinting, our familial imprinting. That's what Saturn is really good at, for better or for worse, right? We need structure, right? We need parameters and limits. But what Uranus wants to do is say, okay, but when you get too crystallized, it needs to be broken down. It needs to be evolved. There's this deconditioning process that Uranus brings us through. And this relation to Saturn and Uranus is very much about, we can relate it to what Carl Jung called the individuation process. We're individuating out of our family of origin, of the society that we're born into, because we need to sort of evolve our own personal journey, our own evolution of the self. It individuates. It has to find its own way. It has to decondition in a lot of ways from the conditioning of the society and the family of origin and the culture. So a lot of deconditioning energy with Uranus, and it tends to be very sudden and disruptive in its energetic patterns. It can be rebellious, it can be revolutionary. So if we think of all of those qualities, how might we want to tap into that Uranian power? And I came up with, radical deconditioning. We could have inventive fellowship, right? As we try to manifest the higher ideals of that Aquarian energy in Saturn. Like, let's build really radical or inventive peer groups, that could really make really important changes in the world, in the environment, which is a very big theme for a lot of us. We're all sensitive to the climate issues that we're facing. And it's, whether you think global warming is real or not, just watch the local news. It's shifting, regardless of what's causing it, it's real. And we're all being faced to the challenges of a new world and a new environment. We really want to get in right relationship with our environment, with Mother Nature, with Earth. Something we're being called back to. I think a lot of people are feeling this, and you're seeing a lot of these back to nature types of movements going on, right? Let's grow our own food. Let's try to keep things local as much as possible. We're going to see this with these supply chain issues, which is another big factor, I think, of this square between Uranus and Saturn, right? Global supply chain issues will continue to be a problem. We're going to be forced to really rethink how we spend our money. What do we value, right? Much more local economies, I think, are going to start to emerge through all of this. Interconnected through technology, right? Through Aquarius, through Saturn, through new structures, new infrastructure, but it'll be much more nimble, much more peer-to-peer, much less top-down, because that's what this whole Pluto and Capricorn thing is really breaking down, is that whole big global hierarchical structure, these systems that are just too complex to manage. We're going to get more grassroots, local roots type of vibe going forward. I think that's one of the positives to come out of all this. And then I just want to zoom up to, we've got the new year. Obviously, New Year's resolutions always important. I would turn your attention to January 2nd, though, because that may be the better time to make your resolutions for 2022. Why is that? Well, we've got a new moon in Capricorn on the 2nd of January. And it just really sort of puts a nice button on this Capricorn season, right? All of this energy, Venus moving retrograde, still in conjunction with Pluto, so we've got all that work we're doing. And then we get the moon coming around, conjoining the sun. Great time to set your intention for the new year. What do you want to do and achieve in 2022? And achievement's it is the theme of Capricorn, achieve. What are the values? What are the structures? What are you going to do that are practical? And I recommend with this new moon, as always with Capricorn, write it down, Draw it out. Draw a map of where you want to get to. Draw a schematic of it, right? Make it concrete. Build a model. Do anything you can do to physically instantiate that vision. Make it concrete. Make it real. Make it three-dimensional. Make it practical. Make it Capricorn, right? And then even put it, maybe bury it. Put it in the earth. Put it in a wooden box or a metal box or a container, something that has structure, right? It's all about structure and backbones. We want to embody it. We want to put it in our bones. We want it to be structured. So any intentions that we make under the influence of this new moon in Capricorn, to that end, that are structured on, keep in mind, right, that Pluto-Venus energy. Can we incorporate all of that? Can we put all that into an intention for 2022? I'm going to get in right relationship with myself, with my partners, with my family, with everyone in my community. I am going to bring my fullest self to this year. I'm going to accept that there is a process of transformation taking place in myself, in my community, on this planet. And we are moving to something new. And yeah, let's build something practical, something useful. Give yourself a goal that you can achieve this year. It's a great time to use this energy of Capricorn, this Capricorn new moon. What do I want to do? Because we're going to be called to do more in 2022. And that gets to what we talked about with the nodal axis. As we move out of that Sag, Gemini, right, fire and air, we've been philosophizing and thinking and coming up with new ideas for the last 18 months. Now, when that shift takes place in the new year, we get into this Taurus, Scorpio axis, right? We're going to come really down into our emotions and into our bodies. We're going to embody and emote a lot more of what it is we've been thinking and feeling and intuiting for the last 18 months. Okay, time for that to really crystallize in a way, and in a good way. Like, we want to inform ourselves of what's most important, what's, this revolution in what we value. It's time to really put it into practice. I think the rubber is going to meet the road in a lot of ways in 2022. Some of them, despite Jupiter and Pisces being maybe a little more nebulous, but there's a nice counterbalance to really getting something a little more grounded in the year to come. So that's all I have for this session. Again, I hope that's helpful. I hope there's some insight, some stuff you can use as you navigate this holiday season. I'm wishing everyone a safe and happy holiday season and a happy new year. We'll be back in 2022 with some more insights. And I hope you can enjoy the quality of the time that you spend with your friends and your family and your loved ones this year. So, till next time. Sat Nam, everyone.